How to change someone's mind, how to switch perspectives, how to know what someone is going to say before they've even said it. Welcome to my speech about you. My name is Ezekiel, and let's start with a story time. When I was younger, I would say that I had anger issues. I mean, it was no surprise to the people around me, it was pretty obvious. And I want to talk about how I overcame these conflicts. My speech is about the power of switching perspective and putting yourself in other people's shoes. The first step to changing perspectives. Changing perspectives is something that people say a lot without really explaining what it means. They always say, put yourself in other people's shoes. But what does it mean, and how can it actually help you? If we look deeper into most conflicts that have happened in the past year or even in the past 50 years, we can see that they stem from an accumulation of misunderstandings and not understanding other people's views. My speech talks about how to break down these conflicts and how to avoid them entirely, or how to avoid them partially, because it's not easy to follow all the steps that I'm going to mention. My first step is listening more and speaking less. Not to say don't get your point across, but to get to a level of understanding where you can actually hear what the other person has to say means that you have to listen, not just hear, and hear, but not just listen, if that makes sense. Now, my next point is acknowledging others' experiences. Acknowledging others' experiences. People all have lives outside of the conversations that you have. I remember once a friend sat us down and told us to really think. When you leave a conversation, the people you were speaking to still have their lives. After you speak to them, they go home and they do an undescribable amount of things. People have lives outside of the conversations that you have with them. And not acknowledging that you're not the center of the universe is weird. And you need to acknowledge that people have lives in order to switch perspectives. No one is really like you. And if you think about it, if everyone was like you, you wouldn't really like that, would you? What makes you you, and what makes you special, is that no one thinks like you. So how is it that people are frustrated when others don't have the same opinions as them? It doesn't really make much sense. If everyone had the same opinion as you, you would be nobody. And without anybody, would it be boring? Everything would be boring. Everyone would just be reflecting your thoughts. This world would be an echo chamber. And my talk also goes over how it doesn't make sense to judge others. And acknowledging that people have the right of choice is also an innate part of switching perspectives. According to the National Institute of Health, switching to a third-person perspective has been associated with surprising rewards. And at the start of my speech, I mentioned how to read what someone is going to do next. And I must admit, I mainly said it so that my speech would sound interesting at the start. But this actually does apply. Switching perspectives can make you predict the future. It can help you know what someone is going to say before they've even opened their mouths. Let's say you spend 1 hour talking to the same person for about 2 months. You get their sense of humor, you get what they'll laugh at or what they won't. I've experienced this personally with friends at school. And I'll be like, Look at him. He's about to laugh at that joke right now. And then he would laugh. And that would confirm my points, and that validates my speech to some extent. Because without being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, how would you understand them? I wouldn't say that I was reading the future, but I was following what I knew about the person. And switching perspectives is what allowed me to do that. My next step is probably the most crucial one in this entire speech. Staying true to oneself. Staying true to yourself is one of the most important things in your entire life. There's a quote that goes, "To stand for nothing means to fall for everything." This means that if you have no idea where you stand in life and what you agree with or what you don't, you can easily be manipulated by people. And trust me, there are people out there who are seeking to manipulate vulnerable-minded people. The power of switching perspective can reinforce your own opinions and biases. And something else that I want to speak about is people who can't admit that they're wrong. Because some people just can't admit that they're wrong. I know you all know someone like that, even if that person is you. But switching perspective also involves knowing whether you are wrong, because this reduces the negative energy of every conversation. Just saying, I'm wrong, and I want to know what you have to say. Knowing that you're wrong takes self-control. Knowing that you're wrong takes maturity, and it's not easy, especially when the point of debate is something that you're very passionate about. Like, let's say I'm into astrophysics and I get into a debate, and I'm mid-debate, I'm like, oh, I was actually wrong. But I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to forfeit. Because I think that being right is better than actually having a meaningful conversation. This is wrong. Having a meaningful conversation is 10 times more valuable than being right, because you learn something from it, and the worst arguments or conversations are the ones from which you get nothing across. No one is listening to the other person. I had an argument with a family member that lasted about an hour, and by the time we were done arguing, no one really remembered what the argument was about, because we had just gone back and forth, shouting over each other, trying to be right. But being right is not always important, and at the end of these kinds of arguments, you just end up feeling foolish. Because some people would rather just leave the entire conversation than admit that they are wrong. And this leads me to my last point. Knowing whether an argument or conversation is worth your time. Is worth your time. Now, valuing your time is very important, because some people really have nothing to bring to the table in terms of conversation and in terms of argument. They argue for the sake of argument. These are the people who you need to point out in the crowd. These are people that you should know, I'm not going to get much out of this conversation, so I might as well leave, you know? A good judge of character is enough to tell you whether someone is going to waste your time in an argument by saying false things, saying rude things, things that are simply not true. I know we all know someone like this. People who just argue with no head or tail to what they're saying. This is because people sometimes have opinions that are not even their own. People have opinions formed of what they want others to think of them. Their opinions are reflective of other people's opinions. These are people who you can tell don't have meaningful things to add to an argument. And these steps that I'm breaking down are what help you not be that person. Have your own voice. Voice what you want to see, voice what you want to hear, and say what you mean. And even if you're wrong, don't get angry that someone has something differently than you to say. because it doesn't make much sense. Staying true to oneself is my last point. Thank you for listening to my speech about you.